When you're ready to write VBA code that can be used anywhere in your workbook, you can create a code module. To create a code module, you display the Visual Basic Editor, again by pressing Alt F11, and then click Insert Module. When you do, a code window opens and a new category called Modules appears in the project panel. Unlike the worksheet and this workbook code modules that allow you to create code for worksheet or workbook events, a regular code module contains macros that you can run from within the Visual Basic Editor, from the macro dialog box, by clicking a worksheet shape to which you've linked the macro, or by clicking a quick access toolbar button. As an example, I'll create the classic Hello World routine that's the traditional first example in programming classes. I'll go into more detail on how to create subroutines in the next movie, so for now don't worry too much about the mechanics of the process. Okay, here's the code. I'll type sub, hello message, and a pair of parentheses to create the subroutine, and then message box that will display hello world. Now when I press Alt F11 to switch back to the Excel program, I can open the macro dialog box and see that the hello message macro is there. When I run it by clicking the macro and then clicking run, the message box with the message hello world appears. When I click OK, the message box goes away. You can have multiple subroutines in a code module as long as each one has its own substatement at the top and end substatement at the bottom. To illustrate the point, I'll go back to the Visual Basic Editor and create a new subroutine called Goodbye World. When I typed the sub Goodbye World statement, Excel created the end substatement for me and drew a line between the two subroutines. Now I can type the code to display a message box, and I'll just say Goodbye World. And with the cursor still in the body of my new subroutine, sub Goodbye World, I can run the subroutine by pressing F5, and the message box appears. If the cursor were within the hello message macros code, such as here, pressing F5 would run that macro. Another element of the Visual Basic Editor worth pointing out is that when you have multiple subroutines in the code module, you can click the Sections List box at the top right of the editor and then click the code section to which you want to move. So you can see here that the cursor is currently within the hello message subroutine, so that appears here. If I click Goodbye World, then Goodbye World appears up here. If I click the list arrow, I can select whether to go to Goodbye World or Hello Message or the declaration section, which I'll cover in a later movie. This capability doesn't mean much when you have only one or two subroutines in a code module, but it helps a lot when you have either 2 or 3 subroutines and one of them's pretty long, or when you have a lot of subroutines and you want to move to a specific one. The natural next question is whether you can have multiple code modules in a single workbook. Absolutely. To create a code module, you click Insert, Module, and a new module appears. Just as you keep different types of data in separate workbooks, you should keep different types of subroutines in different code modules. For example, if you have macros that affect your workbook's formatting and others that manipulate data, you should put all of the formatting macros in one module and the data manipulation macros in the other. The default names for code modules are Module 1, Module 2, and so on, which isn't much help when you're trying to remember which module contains which macros. You can rename a code module by clicking the module in the project panel over here, and then in the properties panel, changing the value for the name property. If for some reason you don't see the properties panel, you can click the name of the module here in the VBA project panel, and then click the properties window button on the standard toolbar or press F4. So for example, if I were to put my formatting code in here, I could name the module formatting. And when I press enter, the name changes. And I have data manipulation code in my other module, so I will change that name as well. And yes, it is possible to rename a worksheet or this workbook code module. A worksheet's code module, such as the one shown here for sheet 1, has 2 elements. The worksheet's code module name appears to the right of the icon, and the worksheet's name, as displayed within the program, appears within parentheses. If you change a worksheet's name in the program, for example, if I were to change sheet 1 to product info, and then press Alt F11 to go back, you'll see that the sheet's code module is still named sheet 1, but the worksheet name, as indicated within the parentheses, is product info. While I often rename code modules I create, I never rename the built-in worksheet or this workbook modules. Because I use those modules almost exclusively for events, I want to be sure I'm putting my code in the right place. Let's say that you've created some very useful code and you want to share it with a colleague. You can always copy and paste the code into a Word document or email message, but doing so runs the risk of having a spell checker or autocorrect operation change your code. A better way to save your code in a text file is to right-click the code module's name. In this case, it's data manipulation, and then click Export File. You can save the file as a .bas or basic code file, or you can save it as a text file. To do that, click the Type down arrow, click All Files, and then type the name for the text file that you want to create. In this case, I will call it datamanipulation.txt. When I'm done, click Save. Just as you can export a code file, you can import one too. To import a code file, you click File, Import File. You can then find the file of the type that you want. In this case, it doesn't have any of these extensions, so I'll call it All Files. And there's my data manipulation text file. To import it, I click Open. Because there was already a file named Data Manipulation, Excel named the new file Data Manipulation 1. You can get rid of a code module by right-clicking the module name and then clicking Remove, which I'll do with the code that I just brought in. Remove Data Manipulation 1. When I do, the Visual Basic Editor asks if I want to export Data Manipulation 1 before removing it. In other words, do I want to create a text backup of the code I'm about to delete, even though the code will be removed from the Visual Basic project? Clicking Yes gives you the same dialog box you use when you export a code module. No deletes the module without saving it, and Cancel closes the dialog box without doing anything. I almost always save my code modules before I delete them. I create a separate directory and give the files names that relate to my project, so on the off chance they contain code I can use later, they'll be there if I want them. In this case, because I brought in code that I just exported, I'll click No. Working with code modules in the Visual Basic Editor isn't complicated, but there are a lot of options you can take advantage of. You can use the techniques from this movie to create and manage your code modules effectively.